Imagine building a simple treehouse for your kids. Nothing fancy, just a fun little project to give them a place to play. Now imagine your HOA Karen neighbor sees it and decides it's a violation. Not because it's unsafe, not because it's against any actual rules, but because she thinks it ruins the neighborhood's aesthetic. She demanded I tear it down immediately. So I did exactly that. But then, I built an even bigger, more outrageous treehouse. With lights, decorations, and a giant sign that said, "Karen's not invited." And that's when things really got interesting. Before we dive into this wild HOA story, don't forget to subscribe to Tailflow, and drop a comment if you've ever dealt with a petty neighbor or HOA drama. It all started as a simple weekend project. My kids, Liam and Sophie, have been begging for a treehouse ever since they saw one at their friend's house. Nothing fancy, just a basic wooden structure with small ladder, a little window, and enough space to call their own. So I did what any parent would do. I grabbed some lumber, dusted off my tools, and spent a couple of weekends building a cozy little treehouse in the big oak tree in our backyard. The kids loved it. They painted it with bright colors, hung up some string lights, and even made a cardboard, "No parents allowed" sign. It was perfect. But you know who didn't love it? Karen. Karen lived 2 houses down. She was the HOA president, of course, with a magical ability to spot violations from a mile away. One afternoon, I was in the backyard with the kids when I heard that familiar, sharp voice. Karen stood at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, squinting at the treehouse like it had personally offended her. She marched over, clipboard in hand. Because, of course, she had a clipboard. "Excuse me," she said, in that tone that makes you instantly regret making eye contact. "That structure violates HOA guidelines." I blinked. "Structure? You mean the treehouse?" "Yes," she snapped. "It's an unsightly hazard and doesn't conform to neighborhood aesthetics." I glanced at the treehouse. It was about as threatening as a lemonade stand. Painted bright blue, with Liam's wonky drawing of a pirate flag taped to the side. I try to be polite. There's nothing in the HOA rules about treehouses. I checked. Karen's nostrils flared. "Well, it's obstructing the view and causing a disruption. I'm filing a complaint." And just like that, she stormed off, leaving me standing there wondering how a kid's treehouse could ruin someone's day. A few days later, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. I opened it and surprise, surprise, it was from the HOA. Notice of violation. The unauthorized structure, treehouse, in your backyard is in violation of HOA regulations concerning neighborhood aesthetics and safety. You are required to remove it within 14 days to avoid further fines. I couldn't believe it. Karen had actually filed a formal complaint. But here's the thing. I wasn't the kind of person to roll over because someone with a clipboard said so. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I read the HOA rulebook, cover to cover. And guess what? There was nothing in there about tree houses. No rules against them. No restrictions. Nothing. Which meant Karen's complaint was based on absolutely nothing. That's when I decided. If she wanted to pick a fight over a harmless little treehouse, I'd give her something worth complaining about. That evening, I sat down with Liam and Sophie. "Hey," I said, grinning. "What if we built a treehouse that's even cooler than this one?" Their eyes lit up. "You mean bigger?" Liam asked. "Wait, bigger," I said. The plan was simple. Tear down the old treehouse. Build a new one, twice the size. Add features that would make it impossible to ignore. We'd turn this petty HOA drama into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. And Karen, she had no idea what was coming. Karen thought she'd won when I took down the original treehouse. She probably sat in her living room, sipping overpriced tea, convinced her HOA powers had crushed another violation. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't giving up. I was leveling up. After we took down the small treehouse, I gathered Liam and Sophie for a planning session. We spread out graph paper, pencils, and crayons on the kitchen table like we were about to design a skyscraper. Liam wanted a pirate ship theme. Sophie insisted on a princess tower with a slide. Me? I just wanted something big enough to make Karen's eye twitch every time she looked out her window. So we compromised. The new design was a two-story treehouse with a rope bridge connecting two separate platforms, a slide spiraling down from the second floor, a lookout tower with a giant flagpole, because why not? And the best part, a big, bold wooden sign that would read, "Karen's not invited." It wasn't just a treehouse anymore. It was a statement. The next weekend, I rolled up with a truck full of lumber, nails, and enough supplies to build a small fortress. As soon as I started unloading the wood, I could feel eyes on me. Karen was standing at her window, watching like a hawk. Her face was a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She knew something was up. But here's where it got interesting. As I started building, neighbors began stopping by. First, it was Mike from across the street. "Building another treehouse?" he asked with a grin. I nodded. "Bigger and better." Then came Jenna, who lived a few houses down. "My kids would love something like this. Need a hand." By the end of the day, I had an impromptu construction crew made up of neighbors, people Karen had probably annoyed at some point. We worked late into the evening, powered by snacks, music, and the shared joy of petty revenge. Karen kept pacing back and forth by her window, occasionally stepping outside to glare at us. She didn't say anything. By the third day, the treehouse was really taking shape. The platforms were up, the rope bridge was secured, and the slide was half installed. That's when Karen made her move. She marched over, armed with her trusty clipboard and an attitude. She didn't even bother with small talk. "This structure is in violation of HOA regulations," she snapped, pointing at the treehouse like it had insulted her directly. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and smiled. "Really? Which rule exactly?" She faltered for a second, flipping through her papers like there was some magical regulation hiding in the margins. It's too tall," she finally blurted out, "obstructing the view of the neighborhood." I nodded slowly. "Interesting. Because I read the HOA handbook. There's no rule about treehouse height. Want to take another guess?" Her face turned the color of an overripe tomato. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," she hissed before stomping back to her house. Karen's complaint didn't slow us down. In fact, it made us work faster. By the end of the week, the treehouse was complete, and it was a masterpiece. It had bright, colorful paint. Liam went with pirate skulls. Sophie added pink stars, Karen's nightmare combination. A giant pirate flag fluttering in the wind. And front and center, right where Karen couldn't miss it, a wooden sign carved with big, bold letters. "Karen's not invited." It was beautiful. The kids loved it. The neighbors loved it. And Karen, well, she looked like she was one HOA violation away from spontaneous combustion. But she wasn't done yet. She had one last card to play. And she was about to make the biggest mistake of all. Karen's face had become a permanent shade of red. The new treehouse, standing tall and unapologetically colorful, was now the centerpiece of the neighborhood and her personal nightmare. But she wasn't ready to admit defeat. No, Karen had one more move, take it to the HOA board. Because, of course, that's what Karens do when they can't win with dirty looks and passive-aggressive notes. A week after the treehouse's grand debut, I found an official letter taped to my door. Standard Karen procedure. Notice of violation. Your newly constructed treehouse has been reported for obstructing neighborhood views, posing safety risks, and violating structural codes as per HOA guidelines. A mandatory hearing will be held to determine further action. Classic Karen. But here's the thing, I was ready. I'd anticipated this move. Before we even finished the treehouse, I double-checked every HOA rule, city code, and obscure regulation she could possibly throw at me. Spoiler, I was in the clear. But Karen didn't know that. She thought she was marching me to my doom. The day of the hearing, I showed up with photos documenting the treehouse's safe construction, a copy of the HOA handbook, highlighted like a college student cramming for finals, and the best part, a petition signed by over a dozen neighbors who loved the treehouse and had zero complaints. Karen showed up with her clipboard. The meeting was held in the community center. Karen strutted in like she was about to deliver the speech of her life, papers clutched dramatically in hand. She started with her usual flair. "This treehouse is an eyesore. It's unsafe, disruptive, and frankly, an embarrassment to our neighborhood." I could see a few HOA board members try not to roll their eyes. One even stifled a laugh. When it was my turn, I calmly presented my case. No HOA rules prohibited the treehouse. It met all local safety regulations. And most importantly, it had overwhelming neighborhood support. Then I handed over the signed petition. The board passed it around, eyebrows raising with each signature. Karen's face? Priceless. She hadn't expected that. Seeing her argument crumble, Karen did what Karens do best. She doubled down. This is clearly a conspiracy against me, she snapped, her voice rising. The noise. The colors. That ridiculous sign. The HOA president leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. You mean the sign that says, Karen's not invited? The room snickered. Karen's face twisted into a scowl. Yes, it's targeted harassment. The president sighed. Karen, it's a joke. Maybe lighten up a little. Karen's jaw dropped. She realized for the first time that she'd lost. After reviewing the evidence, and after Karen's little outburst, the HOA board ruled in my favor. No fines. No removal orders. The treehouse could stay exactly as it was. Karen stormed out of the meeting, mumbling about filing an appeal or calling the city, but everyone knew it was over. She'd officially been defeated by a treehouse. You think after losing at the HOA meeting, Karen would have finally accepted defeat. But no, Karen doesn't quit. Not when there's petty energy to burn. Instead of letting it go, she launched her final, most ridiculous plan yet. And honestly, it was the best entertainment I could have asked for. About 2 weeks after the HOA hearing, I received a letter from the city's code enforcement office. Apparently, there had been an anonymous complaint about an illegal, unsafe structure in my backyard. I wonder who could have filed that. Karen, I'm looking at you. But here's the thing. While Karen was busy filing complaints, I had already done my homework. I'd double-checked every regulation during construction. The treehouse was built within height restrictions, set back far enough from property lines, and reinforced beyond what was required. When the city inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, I greeted him with a smile. Let me guess, you're here about the treehouse? He chuckled. Yeah, got an anonymous report. Seems like someone's not a fan. I gave him a tour, showed him the permits, and even offered him a cold drink. He inspected the treehouse, took a few notes, then said, Well, everything looks great. Honestly, it's better built than most decks I've seen. No issues here. I thanked him as he left, and just for fun, I waved at Karen's house. Because, yes, she was peeking through the blinds. The next day, Karen couldn't hold it in anymore. She stormed into my yard like she was on a mission from the HOA gods. This isn't over, she shouted, pointing at the treehouse like it had personally insulted her. I want to have this thing torn down, one way or another. I stayed calm. Karen, the HOA said it's fine. The city said it's fine. Maybe it's time to move on. Her face turned bright red. Move on. Move on. You're ruining the neighborhood. That's when Mike, my neighbor, who had been watching from his porch, chimed in. Actually, it's the best thing to happen around here. Lighten up, Karen. A few more neighbors nodded in agreement. One even clapped. Karen realized she was outnumbered. She huffed, spun around, and marched back to her house like a villain retreating after losing the final boss battle. To celebrate, I decided to throw a little get-together. Nothing too crazy, just a few neighbors, some snacks, and a giant banner that read, Treehouse Appreciation Party, sorry, Karen's not invited. We set up lawn chairs, played music, and even added a few extra decorations to the treehouse, just to make sure Karen could see it all. And yes, she peeked through her blinds the entire time. After the party, Karen never brought up the treehouse again. Not because she had a change of heart, but because she realized something important. The more she fought it, the more the neighborhood rallied against her. She went from the self-appointed HOA queen to the person everyone rolled their eyes at. Her power? Gone. Her influence? Non-existent. Her clipboard? Retired. As for the treehouse, it's still standing. Bigger, brighter, and bolder than ever. And the sign? We updated it. Now it says, Karen's still not invited. With Karen officially out of moves, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, even fun. No more surprise violation notices taped to doors. No more angry HOA rants about neighborhood aesthetics. And most importantly, The treehouse stood tall, untouched, and now a symbol of victory. But the best part wasn't just winning. It was watching how the whole neighborhood came together because of it. At first, the treehouse was just for my kids. But after the Karen saga, it became a community landmark. Neighbors started referring to it as the Fortress of Freedom, the Karen-proof clubhouse, and my personal favorite, the view that offended Karen. Even people who had never spoken to me before would walk by, smile, and say, "Love what you've done with the place." One neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who had lived on the street for over 20 years, stopped by one day. "You know," he said, "this treehouse did more for this neighborhood than any HOA meeting ever has." He wasn't wrong. After Karen's defeat, people felt more relaxed, less afraid of petty HOA drama. There were more block parties, casual get-togethers, even neighborhood BBQs. And Karen, she stayed in her house, peeking from behind her blinds like a retired villain watching the heroes celebrate. A few months later, Liam and Sophie had an idea. "Can we add more to the treehouse?" Sophie asked. "Like what?" I replied. "A sign that says Neighborhood Headquarters," Liam suggested. "And maybe a slide that goes even higher," Sophie added. I laughed. "But honestly, why not?" So we upgraded. Added a second slide. Hung up colorful lights that you could see from down the street. And yes, we updated the sign one more time. Now it read, "Neighborhood Headquarters, Karen still not invited." It wasn't about Karen anymore. It was about making the treehouse a place where everyone felt welcome, except the fun police, of course. Looking back, it's wild how something as simple as a treehouse turned into a full-blown HOA showdown. But it taught me a few things. Bullies only win if you let them. Karen thrived on intimidation and rules she couldn't actually enforce. Standing up to her showed everyone that her power was an illusion. Know the rules better than the people who try to control you. Reading the HOA handbook cover to cover was the best move I made. It turned Karen's threats into empty words. Petty revenge is underrated. Sometimes a well-placed sign saying, "Karen's not invited," is more powerful than any argument. Community is stronger than control. When neighbors come together, there's nothing a clipboard-wielding Karen can do to stop it. Years later, that treehouse is still standing. The kids have outgrown it, but it remains a symbol of one simple truth. You can't control everything, especially when people decide not to be controlled. Karen wanted to tear down a treehouse. Instead, she accidentally built a community. And honestly, that's the best thing she's ever done. And that's how a simple treehouse became the ultimate symbol of HOA rebellion, and how one petty neighbor accidentally brought an entire community together. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor like Karen? Or maybe you've had your own battle with an HOA that went a little too far. Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video to support more HOA takedowns. Subscribe to Tailflow for epic revenge stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next petty showdown. Thanks for watching, and remember, if someone tries to tear down your treehouse, just build a bigger one. See you in the next one.